do my best to try to make sure you get your chance to speak or ask your questions in a way that the meeting can be structured. So I will go ahead and let staff go ahead and start. I imagine there's some information about the transferring and transferring out that will be brought up here momentarily. So without further ado, thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Good evening, Missy Wilson here on behalf of the Finance Department. I also have to my left Michael Keenan, the financial consultant that has been assisting us with putting the budget together. I've asked him to briefly walk through some of the general fund and special accounts so you better understand the terminology that Alderman Green just referred to, which is about the transferring of funds from one account to another and some significant pieces of the overall budget before we go department by department.
Good evening. Again, my name is Michael Keenan. I've been assisting the city as the Assistant Finance Director during the absence of Brianna. Well, that position is vacant. We have provided you a draft of the 2018-19 budget. Again, we have a memorandum that kind of outlines key changes in the budget, a little bit of background on how we went about preparing this document. We started about 2 months ago, and we met with all the department heads and management and handed out last year's budget as well as worksheets for both personnel, supplies, repairs, and maintenance, those type of sections of the budget. And then we met over the next couple months going through, looking at comparing actual results, reviewing last year's amounts, comparing where we're at this year, and evaluating what requests are for next year, and then came up with the budget that you're going to be reviewing this week and next week. Key components of the budget as far as the general fund, there's been a change in the presentation of public safety personnel, police and EMS. Previously, there were certain individuals that were recorded to and paid from the public safety sales tax. And what we did this year, instead of splitting up the departments into two different funding sources, we looked at trying to simplify the process, both for reporting of the personnel cost and the reporting to include all police and EMS departmental personnel under one budget, which is the general fund. Now, to fund those costs that were previously reported in the public safety sales tax, we're going to have a transfer out of that public safety sales tax fund into the general fund to cover those same expenditures. So you got to realize, looking at the overall, while the general fund budget expenditures have gone up, so have the revenues gone up because of a transfer in from the public safety sales tax. When you look at the public safety sales tax, what you don't see is personnel cost. Those have been replaced by a transfer out to the general fund. Again, it's just a reporting mechanism to simplify the payroll process and, frankly, I think present what the true cost of providing public safety from a personnel standpoint of the police and EMS in one fund, one location. We also addressed some other concerns on the budget as far as significant changes, and we look forward to any questions that you may have as we go through this process. Do you have any questions for me at this point?
Well, I'd just like to say I appreciate the explanation to the public regarding this, because obviously if someone wasn't familiar with that, they would look at the numbers and look completely different. But the whole idea behind this was to simplify this entire process, not only for the general public, but in terms of our own documentation and recording, correct?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct.
Okay, all right. I appreciate your time. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and go forward with first on our agenda would be the Community Development Department. Thank you, Ray, for being here.
Good evening. My name is Ray Hidayatpour with the Community Development Department. I'm going to make this very short and sweet. So I have several other departments involved with this evening tonight. I hope everybody had the opportunity to review the community development budget. And as you can see, there was a slight increase in our budget. And that was mainly due to combination of two factors. One, an increase with the service provider that they had the opportunity to either continue the service or increase the cost. And the other one is due to some of the funds was reallocated, like Mr. Keenan mentioned, some of the fund was reallocated from different departments or different divisions to community development. Having said that, I'm not going to sit here and go line by line, but if you have any questions regarding our budget, I'll be more than happy to answer.
I appreciate you being here, Ray. My observation, I feel like many are similar, that it's very lean. Everything, I mean, this in several departments, obviously. A lot less questions this year than there'll probably be, or from last year, I imagine. At any rate, no new added positions. Obviously, our current P&Z coordinator, it's a vacant position. I appreciate the actual organization chart that you provided. I wanted to ask one question before I call on, or before some of the fellow aldermen get involved here. But my first question was on page 3 of 3 on the nuisance abatement, $46,000 for weeds and brush in terms of addressing that. You know, I know things are tight. What I'm getting at, though, is do you feel like that's an adequate amount to do such?
Well, we increased the weeds and brush a little bit slightly, and mainly due to, I'll give you a couple examples that we encountered last year or this year, that we had an incident. There was a junk trash and debris on a property, and the cost was going to be in the range of $1,500 to $2,000. So as a department, we made a decision not to clean up that property, but write tickets and save that amount to take care of several tall grass and weeds and maybe smaller amount of junk trash and debris. So instead of spending $1,500 on one property, we decided to spend that $1,500 in several properties and take care of several properties. So that's why I increased the amount for the junk trash and weed and junk trash and debris abatement.
So you feel like with our limited resources, that's probably a better way of addressing that?
In my opinion, yes, but again, it's due to the budget constraint. Then
Yeah.
that was our best option.
All right, thank you for the clarification. Mr. Brian Myers.
All right. So I'm impressed. You don't have a lot to work with, but it looks good to me. Is the minor home repair, that $20,000, is that what we approved a couple of meetings ago?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I mean, is there anything that you feel like is not doable? I mean, do you feel overly tight on any of this?
Of course, we are tight, and again, we try to, the way I look at it, try to be a team player. We're all in the same boat and try to pick up some of the slack with the other departments within our budget. But again, we understand the city going through a little bit rough time as for budget-related issues, so we try to work with whatever we have.
Okay, thanks.
Alderman Steve Myers.
Thank you, Chairman Green. Ryan, Alderman Myers touched base on one of my questions. In the minor home repair, that's the Habitat for Humanity partnership, right?
Yes, sir.
We didn't utilize that too much last year. Is that my memory?
We did not utilize that at all, even though we provided the information
Right.
to homeowners, but nobody submitted an application in order to utilize that program.
Wow, that's
But
a shame.
this year we have-
We got the need.
Yes. This year, we already have 5 applicants, and they
Okay,
were
good.
approved.
Good.
And hopefully, probably the entire fund going to be utilized.
Okay, that's a good thing. What's it? This is a little bit outside the box. I know that the fines that are levied in court against some of the violations, those receipts don't go to your department. Those go back into the court system or general fund. Is that?
That's my understanding, but I'm not sure the detail, how that works. I'm not aware of all that information, but that's my understanding, yes.
Gentlemen,
Yeah, those are part of the general fund revenues. They're not assigned to a specific department that might generate those revenues.
can you speak, Ray, on, this calls for speculation. Can you speak on how successful you think from you guys addressing it to them showing up in court to us collecting that revenue? Can you talk about that?
Well, we have both options. We have the option of cleaning up the property and issuing tickets. In many cases, they don't appear in court. Even though if it goes to warrant status, they still don't appear in court. They don't get arrested until, for traffic violations, for some reason get arrested. So, but we move forward with both options that we have. We try to clean up the property. In that case, we put lien on the property, and then we issue tickets also for them to appear in court. So if they appear in court, then there is an opportunity there to let the judge know that there is a lien on this property in addition to the ticket was issued to the individual.
We'll get an opportunity to meet with Judge Fan, so I'll brush that question past her at that point in time as well. But you feel it's a good, I mean, is there some pretty good communication between your department and her department? And
Sure, I mean, it could be better. I mean, there's always room for improvement. But yes, we have pretty good communication, and we have pretty good working relationship with court, yes.
okay, perfect. I appreciate it. Thanks for all your help.
Thank you.
I was asked the same thing. Very good. Alderman Frank Hunt.
Hi, Ray.
Hi.
You know, we've got a large city in our grasp, trying to get the results that will make a difference for all of us. Some of us want to see faster results than maybe what we can afford. But have you analyzed where you were at a year ago and where you're going to be this year in terms of monies that you got to work with and the personnel that you have to work with?
As far as analyzing, no, I really haven't looked at it that deeply to see what we were last year, what we are this year. But again, there's always challenges with the code enforcement and budget and staff, and we always work toward improving what we have. So we always try to work on the process and the steps. I've talked to the code officers, and I've talked to a couple of other cities, and I'm working with Ms. Wilson about how we can come up with a more efficient process and enforcement in order to make this code enforcement, abatement, animal control a little bit more faster and more efficient in order to get better results.
Do you see your departments giving you consistency as far as improvements across the city?
Can you give me an example of what do you mean by this? as
Well,
consistency?
if you've been targeting yards and grass and homes and codes in one area fairly hard, do you go away from that area and then go into another one? Are you able to keep up with the original area and take on your newer responsibilities as you see them?
Yeah, we try to do that. We have neighborhood sweep, weekly neighborhood sweep, and that also depends on the caseload and workload for the code officers. As you know, we have only 3 code officers for the entire city. So we try to be proactive and do neighborhood sweep. There is some area we have to be constantly monitoring that. There is some areas better than the other area. So we spend a little bit more time in that area than the area that don't need that much attention. So, but we constantly work on that, and we try to improve the process the best we can.
My next question is about dogs. Are we making an improvement there? Have we just tried to keep up? It seems like they're getting a little bit more out of control, maybe.
Animal control a little bit more challenging for code officers, especially with the complaint we receive. For example, dogs are at large, and especially if they're after hours. Even though we don't respond to after hours at large complaint, but if it comes a situation that it's an aggressive dog, then we do respond. But the problem with that is by the time the code officers get to that location, the dog is gone. So that's a little bit more challenging. We have a code officer that live in town, but again, that's one code officer that might not be on duty, but every now and then, I ask her to volunteer if she can respond to that call, see if we can get to location faster. But again, that's a little bit challenging for us. If we receive a call, an aggressive dog, by the time we respond there, the animal is gone. So that's a little bit challenging for us.
So what is our evening coverage? Do we have any at this time?
Oh, yes, we have rotation. Every week, we have an animal control officer on duty. They only respond to emergency calls, which is basically injured animal, dog bite, police assist, or stray release.
Okay. And do you have anything to do with burned homes or something of that nature in the communities?
Yes, the building official normally respond to house caught on fire, or if a car ran into a house or commercial property, then the building official get the call, and he responds to those locations.
What's the potential length of time that we allow a home to be burned and then go to the next step?
Well, generally, that takes about, I would say, 4 to 6 months between the time the house get boarded up and then the process of going through the insurance, try to work with the homeowner, or try to work with the insurance company. That process is generally about 6 months.
So how much more would you need to do an extremely quality job out here higher than what we're able to get at this current moment in our present condition?
Of course, with the short of staff right now, we have at least 2 staff member short. Planning and zoning coordinator just left, and we have a permit technician also just left. So we have 2 people down, and we try to do the best we can as far as departmental staff so far. Everybody pitched in. I appreciate everybody's help, and they're doing a great job in order to fill in. And we'll do the best we can with the staff we have right now.
Good luck with Raytown.
Thank you. You too.
I'd like to ask another question. I'm probably going to ask this one a couple different times tonight in regards to the GPS expenditure. So with community development, we budgeted $1375. Could you provide a little more detail? I imagine, so the vehicles we have currently do not have GPS within the community development
Yes, we do.
department? Well, you do? That's
Yes.
Okay, so this is just service then for this. Okay, so this is going to feed into another question I'll ask later tonight, because my understanding was, and maybe I heard this wrong, was that there was getting new GPS. Well, we discussed police several times, obviously, with the GPS situation, but that we were going to get additional GPS with them. I didn't know if we were planning on getting any others for other ones, but everything's been handled on that, just to clarify.
Community Development and Public Works already have theirs
Yeah.
fully outfitted with the current vendor. We are in discussions with PD of doing a pilot to see if we like a different product a little bit better, and if so, it is a little bit cheaper for service, but we need to pilot it to see how it road wears on all of our various vehicles. So we're not ready to transfer any of our existing ones yet from one service provider to another.
Okay, because that was a clarification on that, because I didn't know the whole 1375 went to just service, or there was additional units that were needed, because my understanding was we already at least had it, or we're going to replace, but you said there's now a pilot. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any other questions from community development? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ray. Moving on. Next, we have on the agenda the Parks and Recreation Department. Director Dave Turner, thank you for being here. So President Chris Rathbone's here.
I got a quick question.
Go ahead.
Do y'all draw to see the rotation like a raffle? I mean, how do you, I've never asked this question. How do you decide who goes first and who goes last?
Glad I'm not last this time.
You don't have to make a donation to REAP or anything? Okay, I'm just curious. I never knew how that happened.
All righty. Thanks for the insightful conversation, Steve. Anyway. All right, Dave. Thanks for being here. If you can go ahead and just give us maybe a quick general outline, and we'll ask whatever questions we have. Thanks.
Sure. This year, actually, our revenues, sales tax revenues are a little bit higher than we thought, which is always welcome. We did have a lot lower expenses due to having 2, sometimes 3 positions open throughout the year. That's why our projected expenses for this year are so low. As you can see from our budget of last year, we are lower on our expenses than we were last year, even though we are still over budget compared to revenue. Approaching $60,000 in the red.
I got Missy just before the meeting.
But that is just expenses and obligations that we have to have. We just can't let things fall apart or quit maintaining them. So, again, due to things in the past, we do have about roughly $58,000 more expenses and revenues. I did work with Michael Keaton to cut that as much as we could. We cut water utilities. We cut our gas, fuel for this year. Part of that also is that we did add a full-time position where we tried a part-time position this year. We had somebody down for about 0.23 of a position. It was a maintenance 1 worker. That's the guy that's mowing grass and emptying trash barrels. And we're just not keeping up. We need that to be a full position. We tried to make that cut last year. It's not working out for us. So, again, the full-time staff position, that's pretty close to that, a lot of that $58,000 where we are over in the red.
Yeah, thanks for the explanation on that. I noticed that as well when I was going over this. That obviously is an indicator of some of the increase from last year.
Yeah.
Quick question, just a couple things listed. Also budgeting $50,000 for a potential sales tax issue.
Yes.
Under elections, I pointed out. I think Alderman Moore would be upset with me if I didn't mention the bank charges, which that's not unique to you guys, it's everyone, but he's always harping for public banking. So at any rate, unfortunately, he's not here to chime in on that. I did have a question, though, and again, on the GPS stuff, there was nothing listed. So I was kind of wanting to know, obviously, there's nothing listed, so therefore we're not servicing anything. So there's no GPS with...
Right. The park board decided to decline putting in GPS. Our park trucks are parked at 3:30 in our lot, and they don't go home with anybody. They're right there. We know where they are.
I told everyone I was going to ask those questions every department. So I'll let Alderman Myers, you can go ahead and go. I'll reserve my time here for a moment.
Is my mic on? Okay. So I'm not a huge fan of drawing out of the savings account. I mean, realistically, I'd like to see a balanced budget. This, I don't know, kind of puts a bad taste in my mouth. Realistically, how much, or do you intend to spend $50,000 on an election?
No. Again, that was in the budget from last year. I had called the Jackson County Election Office 3 times trying to get me an estimate of what was a realistic for April of 2019. And I never got any solid answer, so I carried that over because that's what was in the budget last time, honestly.
Teresa, what's the most the city's ever spent on an April election? Ballpark?
The city itself usually budgets $40,000 for the year. Depending on who's on the budget with us, I think maybe $28,000 has been the largest I've ever spent.
28? Mm-hmm. Have you gotten the bill yet for this past one?
Yes, it was less than, I want to say it was 18,000.
18? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you could probably whittle that down if you wanted to try to save some expenditures, but Alderman Green touched on the GPS thing, because that's, I guess, technically in the personnel manual, we need to abide by that, but I only had those 3 things. Thanks.
I appreciate those comments. And I do remember, I think last budget year we allocated, it was 40 for the elections. Alderman Ryan Myers does have a good point about that, though, about the GPS situation. You know, that is in the personnel codes, and I don't personally feel that any department should be treated any differently. So that might be something that can present an opportunity, maybe adjusting those funds to a more appropriate amount, and some of that money can go towards GPS to make sure we get those things in place. I think that's a worthwhile suggestion. Just my 2 cents and obviously yours. 4 cents, there we go, 4 together. Alderman Frank Hunt.
Dave, you've got some performances that you do as a parks group that Mr. Hodges does also with his group, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
You've got mowing, some is contracted out, some is done in-house. Is that what I'm
Yes.
seeing?
Yes, that's true.
And you've got equipment repair and things of that nature because of what you're doing. Have you ever discussed interdepartment communications to see if there's anything that could tie it together? And
Oh, Damon and Tony Mesa have been excellent to work with. When we need a piece of equipment, instead of renting, like the city lift truck, we use that for projects. The tornado damage, I believe that was May 5th. We got to use the lift truck to address some hangers and trees and things like that in-house where we didn't have to contract any of that out. We didn't have to rent any equipment. So we work real close together when in need.
what entails trash hauling with the Parks Department?
All right, we have dumpsters at 3 different locations, at Super Splash, at Coleman Park, and down at Little Blue Trace. When our guys are on the trash run, we have typically two gentlemen go through the parks, empty all the cans, and then they just make that circuit. They'll go out to Little Blue, dump, work their way back to Coleman, dump, and if we need to, we'll dump over at Super Splash 2. That's kind of our reserve if we're getting full somewhere else.
Okay. Thank you. I need to know that.
Sure.
Is there any other questions do we have for, I guess, maybe not. Like I mentioned previously, very lean.
Yeah.
And I joked about this earlier, but this budget process is obviously a lot less stressful for all of us this year than last, considering I think you guys did a good job kind of going over this, and this is the bare minimum. You know, there's obviously no meat on the bone for any of us, but I do appreciate your time and energy and the park board's time and energy on all of this. Ms. Wilson.
Mr. Chair, I just need to have a better understanding of this because there is a park meeting coming up this month. Are you asking the department director to take your recommendations as a committee back to that board and ask their consideration of possibly trimming some of their budget and reallocating the funds accordingly? Because we've got that additional process of approval.
Sure.
The budget that's brought before you is pretty much the budget that their board has approved and asked for you to endorse as is, and you're making some changes and recommendations for consideration.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate course of action. I do, however, though, would like to say 2 things about that. One, I think we have to probably have an official vote as a committee? And then number 2, just to emphasize the fact that this is just a committee, not the entirety of the Board of Aldermen. And the Board of Aldermen, as an entire board, would obviously make that decision when the budget is voted on and finalized.
I just was wanting some direction so that Dave knew how to advise his board at the next
Yeah.
meeting as to your thoughts and your positions on some of those
Is
things.
it okay if we can kind of get kind of a show of hands on our thought process on that in terms of maybe lowering the number
Elections.
a little bit? Yeah, a reduction from 50 to, for the election, from 50 to maybe 40, and then, or
30, because
apparently.
they're going to be splitting it with the city anyway.
Yeah, you'll be splitting the city anyway, that's true. So maybe reducing that to 30, because it's going to go through in terms of the payment on that, and then finding whatever budgeted amount is necessary to put on the GPS systems. to
And we
install those.
can get you the numbers on the GPS according to the 2 different vendors we have in working with,
Okay.
so that'll help.
All righty, well, thank you for the clarification on that, Ms. Wilson. And Mr. Turner, thank you so much for coming today, and thank you for all your hard work. You guys, it's been a busy summer. Yeah.
It really has been.
Yes. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Public Works. Mr. Hodges, Mr. Mesa. Thank you. If you can go ahead and just, give us maybe a quick rundown for the public, and
Sure.
whatever questions we have, we'll throw them out there. Thank you.
I'll give you a quick rundown. One of the things we'll probably look at, we have 4 different funds that we typically utilize with Public Works, actually 5. And what we'll do is kind of look at the ones with general and sewer combined. Those have the same line items pretty much that we go through. Personnel being one of the major ones for both. With personnel, you'll notice that we have on there a engineering technician position that we're looking at that will be new this year. But we did decrease another position called the crew leader. That was a field office personnel. The engineering technician would be an office personnel that would help to utilize with our GIS system, along with our sanitary sewer projects, a lot of our storm sewer projects. Be more beneficial for office use. He will help out, or he or she would help out, should not say he. He or she would help out with other things we have. Right now, we have one right-of-way person that goes around the entire city. If you may have noticed, the utilities are really ramping up. Some of the laws have changed because of that, and has allowed them to ramp up even more. So we have one person that's kind of pretty much doing all those inspections currently. This person would also assist with that in other capacities. But for that, and due to budget, we decided to kind of narrow down our field. Mr. Mesa probably would like that crew leader back, but I think it'll be a good opportunity for us to kind of leverage personnel there and look at both. If you notice that on our, as far as general fund itself, we did decrease quite a bit regarding some of our funding on that and other areas within there. On the sewer side is where we took the crew leader from. You notice there that we pretty much kept everything the same that we had last year. We have a small amount of capital, about $200,000 for that, how large a sewer system that we have. With that, we're able to do some, what we call a lining of our system. We'll be coming to the board this year for this portion, and we'll continue that lining project as we continue on. Those projects award allows you to kind of help with the infiltration, but it's still not where we like to be in order to help keep up with what we have as a sewer system. One of our major projects that we have still in the books here is a 350 highway project. We're going to utilize partially some of our capital improvement funds, capital sales tax funds, and also a major portion of our transportation funds. With that one, we've been able to leverage our grant reimbursement opportunities there. If you notice, about $637,000 that is coming back with that project, but we also utilize the grants that we had on the previous projects. So what we're trying to do, if you notice from last year to this year, our opportunity that we're using was to try to fund as we go instead of just doing a bond off top. So we've been able to fund the past 2 projects, 59th Street and 83rd Street, and now we're going to go to our next major one. I'll go ahead and take a breath and let you all, if you have any questions.
Well, you know, a lot of things in your explanation were just points I was, in terms of going to make out in terms of available grant money from the past versus now, and that's really where we're going to live and die, it seems, in terms of, you know, if we can get a grant, we can do something and try to expand upon that, and if not, it's going to be lean.
It's very lean. With the grants, you typically have to provide at least 20% of that project.
Yeah.
And so,
Which we
and it is very
have difficulty maintaining
competitive, and they want you to have majority of the design done before you even get on there, and you have to be on a lot of the long-range planning. So we've put in for other projects to be on that, some grants, but not having that availability of the funding right off top has kind of hindered us, but we're not going to give up. We're going to still keep going forward with it.
Real quick follow-up on that, just before I get to you, if you don't mind, Alderman Myers. You said that a lot of them want that money up front, so it's more of a who has the quickest draw of the gun, so to speak, to get these.
What they ask you on your application is the availability fund,
Yeah.
how are you going to fund it, how far you are along in your design, what's your community involvement, things of that sort.
So less available funds could also hinder our ability to achieve additional grants.
Yes.
Okay. Alderman Ryan Myers.
Hi, Damon. So you decreased the emergency repair, the 2 line items on there. What? I think it was by a little bit. It might have been like $5 or $10 grand, but is there any reasoning behind that?
Are we talking about sewer fund?
Yeah,
Yes.
I wasn't sure if I was just limited to general fund stuff or if anything that Public Works touches.
On the sewer side, we did decrease it some. Not much.
Because we've almost drained that account already for this year, haven't we?
Yeah, pretty much. We're pretty close to it. Are you talking about sewer? Am I right?
Yeah, the emergency stormwater repair and the stormwater
Oh,
repairs and
stormwater
maintenance.
fund. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were
Oh,
talking about
sorry.
sewer fund. All right. Yes, we have, and we have projects that we still know we're going to do.
Yeah.
So we kind of looked at what we have proposed for next coming year.
Okay.
We had the one that came up on us, the 75th Street project. If you all remember that large sinkhole.
Yep.
Those type of projects that come up, and yes, you're right. We slightly decreased it mainly because of the amount of revenue we have in those funds. We
Okay.
can't really go up.
Gotcha. And then switching over to the capital sales tax. Was the 2 dump trucks, is that a typo, or are you really wanting 2 dump trucks?
We do. We have 2 Sterling dump trucks, and that are 2003 models.
Yeah.
The Sterling is no longer, not Sterling, we'll call it the Sterling, yes. Sterling, and they're no longer serviceable as far as the company itself that we purchased it from. So it's hard to get parts in order to fix them. Those are 2 of our major trucks we use for our snow removal. And ultimately, we don't want to get it to a point to where they're down during the season. We're not able to get parts to even fix them and get them back up there.
Yeah, that wouldn't be fun.
And with it being over 15 years old, that kind of puts us in a pinch.
And then, I don't know, I'm just spitballing on this one, but just in the actual general fund, would it be cost effective if we did mowing in-house and saved 25 grand?
We have staff-wise.
Jason, do you want to do that?
Yes.
I'd be happy to address that. Actually, in order to begin in-house mowing, we'd have to buy equipment. Commercial mowers run about $15,000 to $30,000 each, and they need to be on a 3 to 5 year replacement program. And then it takes 2 people to do the work, and so that amount of staffing would be another $50,000 to $75,000 a year. So
Okay.
it's much cheaper to outsource it.
To outsource?
Yep.
Okay. I will yield my time to everybody else.
Yeah, and if you think about it, with all the benefits and everything like that, just escalates those costs. Yeah. Alderman Steve Myers.
And just real quickly, let me add to that all those figures did not include our cost for liability. So that is a significant piece of that we always have to take into consideration. And we saw when we removed those services, Teresa advised me, we saw a slight decrease in our coverage liability costs because we were no longer having to cover the personnel on those machines, also the machine repairs and other factors that go into that with just mowing around citizens of the community.
Alderman Steve Myers.
Thank you, thank you. I look at the presentation, and all the funding departments, and you got to come away impressed knowing what you guys have to work with, and the request levels and the minimum amounts that you're asking and/or decreasing from last year is impressive, and I think that goes back to probably Chairman Green's comments about we did a lot of the hard scrubbing and opened up a lot of scabs last year. So thank you for bringing a reasonable budget forward. I mean, I guess people can ask, but that's just an exercise, and you know what the answer is going to be. So there's no we know the drill, and you don't need to practice in that. So you budgeted for, and man, I am waiting for the arrival. You know where this is going. You budgeted for the street sweeper in last year's budget, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. We're still fallish? Hopefully, October-ish,
Well,
November-ish?
Probably November-ish. The sweeper itself and the manufacturing, one of the major parts is kind of back ordered, but it's still being worked on. We actually got an email today, so hopefully it'll get delivered this coming November.
We've been able to use theirs how many times?
We've
Couple
used their
times?
loaner, I think it's for the third time. Several weeks. The first one we used several weeks, then we got a couple more weeks after that.
Great.
And we'll get another one this coming September, and we're trying to keep it at least once a month, get it once a month in order to keep it going.
That works. Well, I appreciate the effort in that. You've made it kind of easy. I mean, all your requests are justifiable. personnel. I mean, you guys are doing a great job, and let me turn my light off. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Yeah, frankly, this is probably the quickest I know I've been a part of. I got one more quick question, and this is more for the general public to understand our budget for repair and maintenance services under the transportation sales tax. So we've allocated $250,000 for our asphalt overlay. Could you just really briefly explain that for the public on what all that entails? And I'm going to go down to some of the other ones too, if you don't mind.
Sure. Last time we had 2012, 20, asphalt overlay program we had, last time we had it was 2014.
Yes.
As we said before in that previous pavement analysis, that is a necessity when it comes to your infrastructure. So this would be the first time we made an overlay project so now we're going on close to 5 years, which is not a good thing. Here lately we've been doing a little chip and seal, but this past year we decided to try to bite the bullet for a while and not do any overlay projects with the objective of trying to do our major roadways. So, I mean, ultimately we decided to sacrifice one portion in order to try to get some other items through. The objective was to try to leverage the funds you got. We wanted to do pay-as-you-go instead of putting it all in one egg. And I think we've done a pretty good job. I say staff-wise has done a good job with maintaining what we're trying to do. Our guys have been out and do a lot more potholing, refills, did things like that we've done to do in-house that we can. And what we're trying to do with this one here, we'll bid it out probably early spring to get some overlay projects done this coming summer. The next one, go ahead. You can ask your
Oh, no, sorry. I was going to chime in because I think the only time I remember voting for something like that was probably my first year on the board, and then obviously it disappeared. Being said, $250,000 is obviously we're still falling behind.
Yeah, that's a
with
drop
that.
in the bucket comparison. I mean, we have 331 center lane miles, so you're talking maybe that was about 2 miles in which we could do. So if you did that at $250,000 a pop, 2 miles, you're talking 30 years.
Exactly. Can you go ahead and mention real briefly our curb and sidewalk, the paving contract there?
Yes, we do curb and sidewalk projects throughout, replacement, some spot repairs. We've done that. We did that about 2 years ago. It was a 2-year backlog on that one. And so we do that to go around the city. Typically, we try to follow your overlay program to ensure they're up to date. Whenever you do an overlay program, the ADA requirement is that if you touch it, you got to actually bring it up to code. So if we have sidewalk in that area and our ADA ramps are not up to code, we have to bring those up to code too. So those are some of the areas we're going to be working on, along with other areas. We mainly want to try to look at our school areas if we have any sidewalk going to those and try to help out with those areas too.
Thanks for the more detailed explanation. Alderman Ryan-Myers.
Yeah. I just got one more, just for clarification. For the 350 and Raytown Road, out of the transportation sales tax, there's $1 million. Construction service is $120,000. I mean, that's for engineering and plans and
Yeah, that's actually
whatnot.
for finishing up on the engineering, but also your inspection throughout. Staff-wise, that you want to have the inspection, that have to be a certified personnel to do that.
Right.
And that portion will be portion for that piece.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. MoDOT's got to send their guy.
Yes.
And
Actually, we'll have a guy that would go and they have to do certain things that's MoDOT required in order to, because we're receiving MoDOT funds, the LPA funds, we have to have those type of certifications.
And what was the $450,000 out of the capital sales tax for
Yeah,
that?
the project itself was estimated to be about 1.2 million.
Yeah.
And then with the 450, we added the contingency. Actually, it's more 1.3 million. Sorry about that.
Okay.
And then you had the contingency on that piece too.
Gotcha. That's all I got.
I'd like to actually follow up on something you said. You brought an idea, or not really an idea, but a thought in terms of the inspections. I know years ago, a couple years back, when we obviously received that grant, obviously we had to match some of those funds for downtown streetscape. We had some issues with, well, frankly, some of the management of that project, and one of the issues was with getting an inspector. There had to be a certain type of certification, and we had to get one at the last minute from ODOT. If I'm sure you guys recall that, but at any rate, I know Alderman Myers, Steve Myers, you probably recall that in terms of we had an issue getting somebody the correct certification to do the inspection. I was just curious, and I know funds obviously may limit this, but there was talk during that time that we would try to find an avenue to see if we can get some of our own employees certified through that educational process. Obviously, resources are probably not there, but is that still a thought that maybe could be considered at some point? So that we can
yes.
save the city some money and also provide some professional growth for maybe an interested employee?
If it goes right, we might get an employee ourselves. But
Okay.
we are definitely
That would
looking at,
too.
we have to have certification and to apply for it. But as for the inspection piece, you want to have certain criteria because they have to have material specifications, certification with MoDOT or KDOT and things like that. So ourselves, once I think we get a capital improvement program that'll be levy enough to actually make that investment, I think it'd be great at that time. I would
yeah.
prefer to have staff that would be ready to do that and ready and willing, because to me, also it creates a succession for us as staff. You create somebody who's able to do that inspection, and hopefully they can stay on board and continue to move up in the.
Well, save the city some money.
Yes.
I mean, tremendously. But that requires obviously that capital improvement plan and resources for such.
Yes,
So,
requires that initial
yeah,
investment.
definitely. Well, thank you for that detail. Does anybody have any other questions as of now for Public Works? No? Good. All righty. Thank you guys for coming up this evening. Okay. And last but not least on the agenda, we have Police Department. Chief Lynch, thank you. Major, thank you. Captain, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, as they're coming forward, I'd like to clarify the question that you had asked earlier. Chief Lynch and his staff have been excellent to work with. Once Mr. Hodges and I were made aware of the GPS matter not being resolved before Mr. Cole left, we started re-engaging conversations with them about that. We looked at various products, and earlier this week I received a memo from the chief recommending a product that they seem pleased with. We are working with them to identify which of their vehicles we want to put that on, those GPS systems on, to pilot it for the next 90 days. We'll also put it on one of our Public Works vehicles and probably work with Dave to put it on a parks so that we can monitor across the board the various wear and tear, the information it can give all of the various departments, and we've worked with them also so that we can get timely reports in a manner that keeps their staff safe according to the protocol they need to follow,
Yeah.
but at the same time answers questions that you all have of staff. So I just wanted to say that we are working to address that and probably will have the matter resolved by the end of this week. We've just been a little consumed with putting a budget together.
Sure, no, I understand that completely, and I appreciate, because I was going to obviously mention that earlier about asking about GPS. So the 5,100 budgeted for that is that for part of the pilot program, or is it actually for because I believe there was nine units we needed, is that correct?
No, actually, we have 13 cars at this current time that do not have it on their computer, and we're actually asking them to do several number of those 13 plus some additional ones. And it's my understanding the number you have in the budget is actually the service maintenance for all of the fleet that you have at this current time. So they're using the pilot number.
Okay, so the 5,100 is for the service. Well, okay, then unless,
And the program that they have identified, they do not have to pay to purchase the product. And so everyone that has GPS in their FY19, their budget is identifying service contract value, not the purchase of the hardware, because most of them we've worked out, so we do not have to buy the hardware. If we have to change vendors, we may have to buy hardware if we were not to use the one they're recommending or the one we're currently contracting
okay,
with.
so the purchase of the hardware would not be reflected in this
That's correct.
budget because it'd be the same.
Correct.
Okay. All righty. Well, thank you for the clarification on that. Chief, Major, Captain, thank you for being here. Guys, give us a little quick rundown, I suppose, and ask any questions after done that. I know this is obviously, like I said, with every budget this evening. I mean, if there's another word beyond lean, we can use it. But I appreciate all your folks' efforts and everything. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Green. Obviously, we know the city wants a balanced budget and worked hard to try to meet that goal. Our actual general fund expense is $4,020,000. It's down $335,000 from last year. Our actual PSST expense is $1,630,000, which is $410,000 higher than last year. And we work with Mike, and we're advising that the PSST could absorb more of the police personnel cost to relieve the general fund. It should be noted that all police personnel are budgeted in the general fund. Personnel costs previously paid directly from PSST will reflect as a transfer out of PSST to general fund. Our actual capital expense is $184,000, and it's down $34,000. Overall, our budget increased $39,000, and that's due to healthcare increases. We've added academy training, and we didn't have academy training last year. It's roughly $5,000 to send an individual. And for IT infrastructure, so that was the rise to $39,000. Due to budget cuts from last year, we went from 77 full-time to this year 51 full-time positions. This is our basic operating budget, and I know you'll probably have some questions, so that's all I have right now.
And I do appreciate, and I know that we had the conversation during the budget and after last year about an organization chart, and I know obviously folks were asking questions you really frankly couldn't answer at that time just because of the logistics of who's staying and who's going and how you're going to reorganize these responsibilities and positions. And so I see you provided that, and I appreciate that. I did have a question. It's over a smaller expenditure, but I brought this up last year, and I'm going to bring it up again. So obviously, there's no COLA for city employees last year, and there was none this year. And I still see there's a step increase, and I know that we're talking about almost a $16,000 number there under commission officers. You know, to me, it just doesn't, and I said this last year, I'm being consistent. It doesn't sit right to me. You know, you got folks, this is the second year in a row, no COLA increases. And I say this because folks have to get a real understanding of what's really happening here, you know, in terms of what money the city has and what money it doesn't. And some of it obviously comes on us as elected officials to try to express that, but also the public has a responsibility too to open their ears. And I say this because this obviously hurts our ability to retain employees, you know, and it costs more expenses to try to find them. But the step increase with the commission officers, I know there's a separate, and maybe you can elaborate even more, there's a separate contract with that in terms of, I shouldn't say separate contract, I guess an arrangement agreement or something of that nature where there's set up steps. I just, you know, second year in a row, nobody's getting a pay and raise, but we still have that money allocated for a step increase. I know when I worked for the school, well, I still work for the school district, obviously, but for 4 years, we were without COLA. And I ain't gonna lie, it made me kind of look another direction. But because I lived in this town, obviously, and, you know, have some skin in the game, so to speak, I stayed with the district, and I know we lost a lot of good folks during that time. And so obviously, if there was money for us to do a COLA increase, I would like to see that, but I don't know if the math's there. So if you can give me some more information on the step increase situation, I'd really appreciate that.
I'm going to give you some basics, then Major Hudspeth was the one that put it together. But this started years ago, and Mahesh Sharma was here and agreed that this was a good way for people to have increases by accomplishing a set of goals as they move through the city. The funding mechanism, when we started this, we downsized downstairs to fund this. And I know Major Hudspeth's got this all in his head. You get some more to add? Sure. Yep.
Like the chief said, we basically stole this idea from some neighboring agencies. You know, the economy was doing what it was, and yearly cost of livings really became unsustainable for, you know, most of the country, really. What the step plan is it's not an across-the-board pay increase. It's basically a longevity payment. An officer becomes eligible for it at his fourth year of employment or her fourth year of employment, 8th year, so on and so forth. So it only affects a couple of employees if that falls within their year for that step. And in addition to that, they have to amass a certain amount of training, expertise, specialized classes and this sort of thing. So it's kind of a combination of both training, that professional development is actually what it's called, as part of our professional development plan. We actually explored it when we were doing the employee manual, when we had those committees, doing it citywide, and it just didn't quite get accomplished, I guess. But we looked at it as an alternative to, like you say, retain our employees. The cost of training an employee is exorbitant compared to the money that it takes to keep them, frankly. We're experiencing that this year, worse than ever. And that's what it's for. We self-fund it, we put it into our budget. We count it as part of our operating expense.
And I appreciate all that, and I do understand. I remember when some of this dialogue, I believe, came up, I think my maybe first or second year on the board. And I agree, it's a nice incentive. I just, the situation we're in, and I know it's $16,000, but I tell you, it's like last year when I brought it up, I just, with the situation at City Hall, 2 years in a row with a COLA, no COLA, there's no raises. It just doesn't sit well with me, and I do appreciate the intention. I really do. I can understand that, and I think now I'm getting a little bit of an experience on what the school board probably felt like during the recession when they were dealing with us teachers and coaches, So I've been talking for a little bit. I'm going to see if anyone else on the board wants to chime in on anything or have any questions. Alderman Ryan Myers.
Hey, guys. I didn't get a chance to pull up the video from, I think, last board meeting, but I'm coming out of the capital sales tax. I could have sworn I heard that you guys only need 4 more of the APX 4500s to complete the swap of all the radios.
If I remember correctly here, going to have to, I wish Candace was here for this. The APX are for vehicles, not the handhelds. The completed swap was for these guys right here. They're still in-car radios, the hard-mounted ones in the police cars.
So that's on top of that? Mm-hmm. Now, is this 10 the only 10 that we're doing and that's done?
Can't answer that. I don't know.
That sounds about right for what we need to replace in our vehicles.
Because, surely we don't have, we have several vehicles, I know that. But that would probably swap a pretty good deal of them out, I would think.
They have to be replaced. It's mandatory, or they.
Right. But because it's the whole Motorola thing that they won't work
That's
because they're.
interoperable communication with other agencies and.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, where else was I? Just a quick question when I was going through my budget book, like when we have a homicide or have to call in an outside agency, does Metro Squad charge to do anything?
The Metro Squad will only come out on homicide cases.
It's only homicide?
Right.
Does Highway Patrol, do they charge when they have to come out and do I know they've been out on several of our investigations lately. We don't have to pay them anything to do that, do we?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
That was just a question that kind of popped up in my head when I was going through my book, but I was also curious. I know there's some expenditures for weapons parts. Are officers in Raytown, do they have to pay for their own sidearm, or is that, because I know Kansas City does, but I'm not sure if the department pays for sidearms here or not.
Yes.
They do?
Yeah.
What about a vehicle gun, a long gun?
Department.
The department supplies it?
Yeah.
And provides it? Okay. And I talked to the judge, and I know you guys don't have anything coming down the pipeline in terms of any more employment, but do you guys have a plan in place for personnel to address? Because we've got over 8,000 outstanding warrants. Do you guys have any plan of action to kind of take care of that? Because that seems like a lot of warrants.
Yeah, and it is. And, you know, of course, if you have everything that you can, and all the personnel that you can do, you can chase them around, have a warrant squad, and it was one of my intentions, you know, years ago, even before budget. But understand, too, that when we bring somebody in, there has to be somebody here to watch them.
Yeah.
And we have 3 people right now in booking. So it may be that we have to call somebody in for overtime or whatever to watch people. So when they have a warrant, they're eligible for bond also. And if it's serious enough, they'll go to Johnson County. Jackson County warrants go to Jackson County, they house them, if it's a, you know, felony offense. So, I mean, it's twofold. We do serve warrants, and I had it for a couple of years ago, how many warrants we actually do serve. As far as going out and serving city warrants, we try to do that, but it's probably not to the scale that we used to be able to do.
Yeah.
When we had people here. You have to have somebody in jail watching them.
Because generally speaking, a detention supervisor, a detention tech is considerably cheaper than a full-time officer, right?
Detention officers are, yeah, they're paid on a lower scale.
I mean, yeah, okay, so they're hourly, right? I guess everybody
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the department's hourly, but, so after I talked to Tracy, and she said that, you know, even when outside agencies are picking up our warrants, we're not sending people out to get them. I mean, is that just because we're short-staffed, or what?
It's entirely possible, yes. I'd have to find, you know, different cases, I don't know, but I'd say in general, that's probably it. Would you?
Well, I mean, it's not an across-the-board deal. If we have somebody sitting in jail, we have a detention officer sitting in the jail, obviously, we'll go pick them up. That's a no-brainer. That's what they're there for.
Right.
But those come in at 24 hours a day, 7 to 8. They're all times a night and on weekends and all that. And what it would require us to do is pull another officer off the street or call somebody on overtime for this warrant, which we've generally trying to avoid. Obviously, we've been monitoring our budget literally by the pay period to make sure we don't spend too much overtime in any given pay period. I mean, it's tight, as Mr. Keenan can attest.
Right.
We're right on track to not go over budget, so we're being real careful with that. But it's not a universal truth that we're not, holding people for warrants. Has that probably happened? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you can get a phone call at, 11 o'clock at night from Topeka or something, and they pick somebody from, does that work out of state, I guess?
No.
So it's only in state. So Blue Springs picks up one of our people at 11 o'clock in the night. If we don't have anybody here, you guys just say, well, we can't do anything about that.
Yeah, we call it an advise and release. We tell them, hey, you've got a warrant, you need to come take care of it, and if we catch them when there's a time, we have jailers, obviously, we take them into custody.
Right. Well, and I've even heard that, the bond people are kind of leery about putting bonds on Raytown people. Luckily, I've never been arrested, so I'm not entirely educated on the system, but at least what I've heard is the bondsmen are being kind of leery of this. But with that, I'm just going to yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. I had another quick question. Would you like to go first, Alderman Myers, or?
I didn't have my light on, so you can.
All right. Well, no, you seem pretty eager there. That's right. I know training's diminished from obviously the constraints. 14,000 in training ammo. I mean, is that enough? I mean, I went through $50 just in a few minutes, 30 minutes at Blue Steel with my 9mm. I mean, I looked at that number and I'm like, I mean, do you feel like, you guys are training with your weapons probably less, I imagine. Is that correct? Would that be a correct statement to say?
It is correct, but ammo is not the most expensive part. The overtime
It's the time of the actual
the time-
individual train, the employee
We're
to train.
watching it so close. We're basically, we have certain obligations, state minimums, this kinds of thing, policy minimums.
Yeah.
We're meeting those, but we're not training like we once were now.
So the main issue why we're maybe training less is more of a labor issue as opposed to more of a material issue.
Yeah, we utilize the state contract, which is cooperative bid, which is about 60% of what you would pay for
Okay.
ammunition. We have a large spreadsheet that we break it out by officer, how much we intend to train them.
Yeah.
But really, the biggest hang-up has been, we don't want to spend the man hours. And yeah, it concerns me, the long-term, competency of our officers. is a concern for me as a firearms instructor myself.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, well, I mean, I would understand. I just, when I was just thinking of my personal experience, how much money I blew through real quick, and that was an issue. Alderman Myers. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I knew eventually we'd get to the dark word in the room, which is overtime. So it sounds like you guys are tracking the expenditure this year. And obviously, you were pretty upfront and honest last year, knowing we don't know. That was a very fair statement after the alignment and stuff. So your projection of about $268,000 for overtime, am I reading that right? Okay. With some hirings, I mean, how does that figure? I should have researched it, so I'm going to get an F in the research department. But what are you on track to spend this year, which was a stressful year in that regard, versus your projection for next year?
Okay, well, like I say, we're actually doing data dumps directly from the Encode system, which is the budget system. And we expect to be right on track. Now, it may not be exactly overtime or public safety sales. It may not all jive the way we expected them to, but overall, we expect to be within budget. Early on, we had a lot more overtime because we lost so many officers, right? So, I mean, it's all hands on deck kind of thing. We've been able to backfill and hire some certified officers from other agencies and other counties, and that's helped a lot. I actually have a graph that shows our overtime that we just use for in-house stuff, and you can see, in November it was really high, and it just kind of started trending downward. Then you have a couple of homicides or major events, and it pops up a little bit for that pay period. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. At mid-year and since then, we were right at 50%. Now, that doesn't mean that we might not have a series of major crimes at any time and blow it out of the water, because those are very expensive to investigate. But right now, we're on track.
And that's a good thing to hear, because that's, like you said, that's a hard figure to speculate. So, did your projection for next year, is that less than? I mean, how'd you analyze knowing what? And again, that's calls for speculation.
We're literally trying to predict the price of gas. We don't really know what's going to happen next year. We know that historically, the guys that are on call, namely the detectives, they incur a lot more overtime. The guys that are trainers incur more overtime because they generally train on their day off, which is what we were alluding to a second ago with firearms training, defensive tactics training. So it really is a guess, and we try to keep it at a number that keeps us under budget.
But realistic number, too.
Knowing that we can't predict, maybe we have to cancel training because we had a homicide. I mean, those are management decisions you have to make on the fly.
One additional thing, too, is we have several people in training. I don't know what it is today, but we're paying their salary, but they're riding double in a car, they're in the academy or whatever. So that might also loosen up the overtime when they're ready to be by themselves.
Well, and I think I've heard a little bit. Your business, the only similar aspect in your business as mine is I might write 2 policies and I might lose 2 the same day. So are I gaining ground? Answer is no. You've hired some officers, but I think, Randy, we've talked on 1 or 2 occasions. Yeah, we hired 2, but I got a notice today I'm losing 1. So, I mean, hopefully we're just about through that part of it, but you never know.
We lost 26 since this started. That's half the PD. We've been backfilling to try and get to our new authorized strength, which is in front of you of 36. Like the chief mentioned, one of the troubles is, especially if they're not certified, they have to go to the academy for 4 to 6 months, depending on where we send them, and then another 3 months of training. They're not able to really cover shifts and do the things that we can do with an employee that's been through that process. So to answer your question, as those people get released out of training, we do expect to need less overtime because, for an individual, because we'll be able to fill them with guys at regular time.
So you're saying they're
now,
possibly a glim light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, right now we have, well, I'm not going to go that far. Right now we have 35, but we're only have 29 deployable because they're in training.
Right, I understand. Okay, thank you.
To follow up a little bit on Alderman Steve Meyer's question, and obviously you just mentioned, Major, that obviously several months for academy and training to get new employees. I mean, is it, and I know when you hire somebody, you You also have, pension, obviously, issues, health insurance, things like benefits such as that. But I mean, is it at this point still advantageous to do overtime as opposed to hire? And I know there's other conditions in terms of the time to get new hires and obviously the quality of individual, especially when the economy is a 3.9% unemployment rate. It's a little bit harder to attract, quality individuals. But would that be a fair statement?
I'm not real sure what you're asking.
I'm asking if it's more advantageous financially advantageous rather. Yeah, that'd be the best way to put it, to do more overtime right now as opposed to additional hiring.
Go ahead. Okay. There's a lot of moving parts there. We have, many of our officers are up against they haven't been able to take time off. Vacation time is an issue. They're up against the max. That's an issue. We've been fortunate that we've been able to get some officers from other counties. We haven't really attracted any from, once you get out of Jackson County, the pay gets considerably less. And we've been able to attract some of those officers that come in and they do an abbreviated training program and, hey, they're good to go, right? So that's helpful. But you can't just, you got to take care of your people to some extent. You can't just pile overtime on them. And, I've heard from more than one that, hey, my guys are worn out. They need some time off. And that's where, we fill in shifts, go out and spend patrol shifts for the day, that kind of thing. And all the staff are doing it. So it's a kind of an all hands on deck approach rather to keeping our streets staffed so we can get some people some needed time off.
So to my point though, yeah. So the strategy the department has chosen, I guess, if correct me if I'm wrong, is to wean off the overtime to hire.
Right.
Okay, that's what okay, just to make sure I was hearing that correctly. And obviously right now in this situation, we're obviously utilizing reserve officers to try to avoid some of those other overtime type costs, correct?
Chief actually put some minimum standards that they have to fill in certain shifts, which is new for us. Just to kind of, again, put all hands on deck.
Okay. Well, thank you for the information. Does anybody have any further questions?
I got one question.
All right, Alderman Frank Hunt.
Mr. Hudspeth.
Ding, ding. How many people's in your reserve squad? 9. Now, can you explain what the reserve squad really is?
You're asking what the reserve squad really is?
That was my question.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure I understood. They do the same general work that an officer on the streets would do. A lot of the officers that we have are former officers.
Okay.
At one time, I think we had 25 reserves, and, we have 9 now. So they do basically the same job. They get in a police car, and they go out and answer calls, and just pretty basic what the uniform patrol officers do.
Do they fill in the gaps and give you guys a break so that you don't have to fill in as many shifts?
Sure.
Okay. So we're not seeing them placed out on the chart as far as what their obligations are. So that's why I asked the question. It looks like it's almost kind of quiet.
Well, it's really, some of them work more than others, we basically use them to fill in. Say an officer's planning a family vacation, he needs 4 shifts off. We'll see if we can get 3 or 4 reserves to fill in his shifts. It's kind of like that. So like when we have one that's currently in school, now that it's summer, he can work a lot. When summer kicks back up, he won't be able to work quite as much, But at one time, they were all full-time officers. They're fully certified. We have total confidence in them, and they've been a huge help in helping us fill those staffing minimums.
Looks good. Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? I appreciate everyone being here. Comments, all hands on deck. Obviously, if there's another word for lean, I'd like to use it. Anorexic, maybe, I don't know. That's I hate to say that, but that's the reality of the situation, and folks need to hear it. So, at any rate, I appreciate your time, everyone's time. Thank you. Okay, Miss Wilson, anything else you'd like to add before we adjourn?
Thank you.
Probably wasn't PC there.
Mr. Chair, you had asked a question as to what the cost would be if we could provide a 1 or a 2% COLA. And Mr. Keenan has done the math for you so that you all have that number as you're looking at the information that's before you tonight and what will be coming before you next week.
Okay, the amount for a 1% COLA is approximately $86,000. A 2% COLA would be twice that, approximately $172,000. Spread across funds, $72,000 or double that, $144,000 would be the general fund. Park fund would be $5,000 or $11,000. And then the sewer fund would be about $8,500 or $16,000, spreading those amounts across funds. And that includes benefits as well as the COLA increase. So that would be the total cost if indeed there was a COLA.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I asked that question previously, obviously, because last year that was one of those issues that originally we budgeted for 3%, and then that number gravitated down to nothing. And the fear is that you hate to lose quality employees because it could be more expensive to try to replace them. Obviously, Alderman Ryan Myers, you got a question?
I should probably ask this since I'm not going to be here next week, but Michael, do you have any, I guess, obvious concerns going through this whole process? Anything that we should keep an eye on? I'm just trying to cover bases at this point.
No, I don't think there's any obvious concerns.
Okay.
When we look through the last year's budget, where we're at through this year, and projecting out, and again, meeting with the department heads, they were very professional. We looked at, again, having a lean budget, being realistic, being conservative on the revenues. And so we think in here is a pretty representative of what we believe is a good estimate for next year's budget. So,
okay.
Other than we always could use more revenues.
Right. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify something for the viewing audience. The numbers that have been given to you for a 1% or a 2% COLA, I know that as elected officials, you sometimes will take flack for this. The elected officials are not included in that. Our numbers are for the employees of City Hall across the board. Elected officials, all elected officials of the city of Raytown would be left out of that.
I appreciate that comment. I think the message out there is that Steve and I may own a lake house at the Ozarks that the city finances, and resort trips to Tantera. Is that something like that? I think is where we were heading.
Well, I mean, it's not the Ozarks. It's down at Bombatera. But,
the Ozarks would be.
It's not front water either. I do have one question. And again, this is for educational purposes for the audience, for the millions watching at home. Can you explain the sewer fund? Because there's a misnomer that there's a large amount of cash just sitting in there at any given moment that we're just collecting interest on, and that's not how that system operates. We take in money, but don't we have to pay people out of that fund? I mean, it's been a while that I've had it explained to me as well. So if you could help me with that. I could try to
be funny, but I think I'll just answer the question.
That's my department.
Obviously, the sewer fund, looking at it, you outsource or has to get the water from two different sources, and you have to pay for the sewer. And that's the main expenses of the sewer, including payroll. And then you have to charge the customers, the residents, sufficient amount of funds to cover those costs, including depreciation for sewer lines and other repair and maintenance type of items. I'm not sure what you're referring to, the cash accounts. I think there's some reserve accounts related to some bonds that are on the balance sheet. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, but those are restricted funds that can only be used to pay debt service. Does that answer I think your question,
Yeah,
or?
you partially, and, you know, we've had to make some estimates from the Little Blue Valley district that keeps increasing our fees for the services that they provide for our, maybe I'm talking about two different funds in that regard.
No, I think that's the right fund, the sewer fund.
Okay, yeah, I thought so. You know, we've had to try to speculate. We've seen the charts, and we've tried to speculate how much they're going to increase, you know, our expenses. And so, you know, we've had to put a little bit of burden on our citizens that have to incur those costs on their sewer bills.
Yeah, I believe next meeting, there'll be discussion, a presentation of a rate study.
Okay.
And those will help address those issues. The budget that you see here, as it notes, contemplates a 10% rate increase.
There we go.
And also contemplates additional increases from the two providers. So this is a good estimate of what we believe the expenditures are going to be. And it's my understanding it's been a while since there's been sewer rate increases. And those types of items will be pointed out when that study is reviewed at the next meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
We didn't want to steal the thunder of next week's meeting because I know it's just a riveting topic for you, but.
Well, I mean, my phone is ringing off the hooks in regards to that particular issue, so.
Last question here, Alderman Ryan Myers.
Okay, so last question. I promise. I had a light bulb go off when Alderman Hunt was talking. Randy, would it help if we called up more reserve officers? Would that help with the overtime?
Well, as the tracking is kind of the issue, you gotta find people that want to be able to report. Right now, we've been very open, we haven't seen many applicants. People who want to be reserve officers, have left here.
Because usually it's people that retire in the past that will get called up again, right, as a reserve officer? Or you can just hire them?
A lot of them just left law enforcement, but maintain that reserve position.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. That was just a light bulb I had go off.
Use about 30 of them.
Okay.
Okay, without any further conversation, meeting adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.